Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Not going to say it. Not going to say it. But I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. So it should be a great conversation. Well, obviously, reacting to the latest news. Wasn't planning to stream tonight, but I saw the news out of France. Figured I ought to do a stream. I've got a lot to say about it. And I will probably surprise people from many different angles, but that'll be good. Anyhow, glad you all are here. And so I'm going to put on the opening music and we're just going to do a late night stream. I hope you all had a good weekend and I hope you all enjoy it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Now, the way we do these streams, for those of you who may not be familiar, first I give my opening remarks, which is about whatever I'm going to talk about, which tonight has a lot to do with the French election results. Then after that, we do a roll call where I find out who is watching, names and locations. We go from there. And then after that, I answer your questions and respond to your super chats and Rumble rants for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, all you need to do is send me a super chat on YouTube or send me a Rumble rant on Rumble. That is the way that you can engage with me. If you're on Facebook, just change to YouTube or Rumble and send me a super chat. Now, just a couple announcements while we're at it. Just a couple quick announcements. First things first is we are doing morning messages on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel every morning. So start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. We got another great message coming up tomorrow morning. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. Morning messages premiere at 6 a.m. every morning. We're trying to get as many of them as we can, trying to do them every single day. We're trying to get back in the habit of having them. It's just a great way to start your day. The Center for Political Innovation has a lot of great people who really want to inspire each other. We really want to focus on being optimistic, constructive, not destructive like the synthetic left, not about tearing people down, not about inciting people against each other, but rather putting together a program to save our country from the nightmare of big bankers and imperialism and the low-wage police state. So I encourage you to watch our morning messages. And if you would like to record a morning message, generally we want CPI members to record them. But if you would like to submit a morning message, you can submit them at this address. You can send me the file. We'll obviously pre-screen it. We're not just going to throw anything up there. But if you want to submit a morning message, shout out to Peter Coffin. He figured out how to do this. If you want to submit a morning message for the CPI YouTube channel, we have a special link that you can use. So submit a video. If you want to submit a morning message, you can submit it here. Just as a place to upload the file. Obviously, we'll watch it first. If you do something crazy like take your clothes off or use foul language or, denigrate ethnic minorities or something like that, we're not going to show it. But if you feel like you would have an inspiring morning message for the CPI community, you can submit a morning message. That is something that we now have the option of doing thanks to the great Peter Coffin. Shout out to Peter Coffin, by the way, great member of our board of directors, a very, very dedicated CPI member and a great comedian and a YouTube entertainer. Great guy. And he figured out how to have people submit a morning message. So yeah, there you go. And that's on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. So we got that going on. There are a couple events in the works, but I will keep you up to date as those events are happening. But anyhow, just to remind everybody the way these streams work, first I give my opening remarks. After that, I give the roll call. After that, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like to talk about in the second half of our show, send me a super chat or send me a Rumble rant. So I'm going to get into my opening remarks now, folks. I don't know if you saw, my jaw dropped. I could not believe it. But the second round of voting happened in the French National Assembly parliamentary elections. And the party that has the plurality is the Popular Front, the National Popular Front, the Communists. The party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, if I'm saying that correctly, the Communists have won the French election. Now, my jaw dropped. My jaw dropped. And the reason that my jaw dropped is that the guy who is the leader of the French Communist Coalition, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he is somebody who is legit on some level. I mean, he's legit. He is a longtime labor activist. He defended Crimea joining with Russia. He has opposed Russia in Ukraine, the special military operation, but he has said that the crisis was caused by NATO. He is someone who is associated with genuine anti-imperialist, anti-colonial movements in France. Someone who, to some degree or other, has legit credentials as an anti-imperialist. And his coalition that includes his own party, which is called like France Onward or French People Outraged or something like that. I don't know exactly how it translates. The Communist Party of France, the Green Party, various Trotskyite and Maoist groups. This coalition of communists appears to be the winner of the French elections. And my jaw dropped when I saw that. But George Galloway congratulated Jean-Luc Mélenchon. George Galloway is a friend and someone I look up to. And it appears that the mainstream liberal order, to some degree or other, is outraged. They're calling it a big win for Putin. They're saying that this is the end of French support for the opposition to Russia and Ukraine, for the Kiev government. I'm saying this is the last nail in the coffin of the Kiev government. This is the end of Ukraine. And I'm looking on and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. No one saw this coming. I will say this was a big surprise. This was a very, very big surprise. And tonight I am going to tell you how I interpret this, and I'm going to try to avoid doing two things. When something like this happens, there's one school of people that you find who they go out of their way to say, no, it doesn't mean shit. And in doing so, they render themselves irrelevant because no matter what happens, they're going to sit there and say, no, it doesn't mean shit. And if somebody responds to this event tonight and says, no, this doesn't mean shit, if that's what they say, then they're out of touch because this is quite a big deal. And Mélenchon, maybe not all of his allies, and we'll get to that. This is a big deal. It's a big defeat for NATO. It's a big defeat for the French establishment. So there's a crowd of people leftists, Trotskyites, Maoists, others, they will just look at this and they'll just go, no, there's problems with it. It doesn't mean shit. And they just get back to being people on the internet that are not attached to any real social forces. They're the same people that hate all the socialist governments that are, I mean, they just are just people that are not connected to anything real. And they're just, naysayers. And we don't want to be that. You'll remember I tried to like AOC. I hate AOC now at this point. I think she's despicable. I like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't like AOC. Right? I think Marjorie Taylor Greene says a lot of good things in addition to the bad things she says. I don't think AOC says any good things. Whenever I hear AOC open her mouth, I don't hear anything good ever. When Marjorie Taylor Greene speaks, about half the time I agree with what she says. About Julian Assange, she was totally right on that. About Ukraine, she's totally right on that. But when I hear AOC speak, I don't hear anything I agree with at this point. Nothing. I mean, there's nothing that AOC says that I agree with. Whereas about half of what Marjorie Taylor Greene says about our civil liberties, about spending weapons on Ukraine, about the permanent war state, and about economic development and globalism. There's a lot of good things that Marjorie Taylor Greene says. She also says a lot of awful things about Israel, awful things about all kinds of issues that I don't agree with. But she's about half right, whereas AOC is 0% right. I don't ever hear anything good that AOC says, but I tried to like AOC. I made a big effort. And the first couple years, you'll remember the first 2 years that AOC was in office, I tried to like AOC because she was young, and I thought maybe there was some potential there. I was wrong. There was no potential there. But I didn't want to be a naysayer, right? I didn't want to be one of these people that just goes, no, I didn't want to be that. I did not want to be that. Because if you do that, you just render yourself irrelevant. You're just a naysayer on the internet. You're not attached to anything real. And I don't want to be that. Right. I just don't want to be that. So, yeah. But that said, right, I also don't want to be a cheerleader because there's way too much of this. And this is the other extreme that I see all the time. When something like this happens, it looks like somebody who's, legitimately anti-imperialist or legitimately tied to socialism, they win, and there's just this yay, and there's applause, right? And that is also bad. And I used to be in a communist group that was just like that, right? Anytime anything happened, Black Lives Matter, yay, right? Transgender, yay, right? Stop Trump, yay. Me Too, yeah. Whatever was trendy, whatever looked like kind of leftist or socialisty, they would just cheer for no matter what, right? Meanwhile, we were seeing that the left was becoming the main enforcers of imperialism. The left were becoming, the main enforcers of the low-wage police state. Cancel culture was destroying organizations. But, they just sit there, yay, they just applaud for anything. I don't want to be that either, right? I did a stream recently about the Labour Party in Britain. They're not good folks, and I do not celebrate in any way the victory of the Labour Party and Keir Starmer. I do celebrate Mélenchon, but I have my concerns. And that's why tonight I will tell you why Mélenchon and the victory of the National Popular Front in France is completely different than the victory of the Labour Party, but it's still a very dangerous situation. And there's a lot of things there that are a reason for concern. I'm not just going to blindly applaud for something when I see big problems, but I'm also not going to poo-poo it when I see potential there. And so let's just talk about this, right? France is different than Britain and America. It's especially different than America, right? In France, the birth of the French Republic and the birth of modern France was the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was a capitalist revolution against feudalism. France was an absolute monarchy, a Roman Catholic absolute monarch country. And the peasants rose up and they overthrew the French government. They cut the king's head off. And they had, for a couple years, they had a very unstable, very violent revolutionary government. And then Napoleon came in and brought in kind of a military dictatorship that kind of stabilized things, eventually proclaimed himself emperor, and that because of that, France, what you might call leftist aesthetics or leftist politics, is part of the French national identity. It's not in the United States. We don't think of George Washington as a leftist. We don't think of George Washington as some, rabble-rousing radical who stormed the barricades and was waving a red flag. And, we don't think of George Washington that way. In some ways, he was, right? George Washington was against the British Empire. George Washington was rallying the people for economic development, saying that he did not want America to just be an outpost in the British global free trade empire. He wanted an independent republic where there could be development. But George Washington was also a slave owner. It's complicated, right? And the founders of the United States were divided on the French Revolution, right? Some of them were enthusiastic supporters. Some of them were very opposed to it. And they were divided on the Haitian Revolution too. In Haiti, right, the Haitian people who were colonized by France, they rose up. And there's a book called Black Jacobins that talks about how the slave revolutionaries of Haiti were, in a way, they were more true to the principles of the French Revolution than the French government was, and that Alexander Hamilton, one of the founders of the United States, supported the Haitian slave revolution. He said these are slaves breaking their chains, taking control of an island where they were enslaved and colonized. We support that. So it's complicated. The American revolution is complicated, just like the French Revolution. But the French Revolution is the source of the left aesthetic, right? We all know the symbol of communism globally, at least in the 20th century, was the red flag, right? Communists had the red flag. The Soviet Union, they had a big red flag. That was their symbol. Well, that comes from the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, the revolutionaries, their symbol was a red cap. They wore a red hat. And so the radicals in the French Revolution, the Jacobins, they wore the red caps. And so eventually the red cap became a red flag, and that was the symbol of revolution. We also know that, that we have this concept of the left and the right. That comes from the French Revolution. After the king was overthrown, the people that were more loyal to the king sat on the right, and the people that were considered to be more modern and called themselves innovators, they sat on the left, the more radical. And the Jacobins, they were the left wing, the more radical wing of the French Revolution. And the Girondists, they were the more conservative wing of the French Revolution. So the very phrases of left and right come from the French Revolution. So France, and their national anthem comes from the French Revolution. Dun 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 dun. And so French culture, right, and French society being left is very much part of the French national identity. And so, and even right-wing movements in France, like conservative movements and far-right movements, very much play into that ideal. And there's many examples of that. The Nazis, when they took power in Germany, they used the guillotine as their method of execution. And Adolf Hitler was a huge admirer of Napoleon, and that even some of the sentiments that are only associated with the left here are associated with the right as well in France, because that's just part of the aesthetic, part of the culture. So, in France, obviously, the Communist Party is a much bigger political organization. It still to this day controls certain districts, has many seats in the parliament. And that, in French society in general, one is expected to be familiar with Marxist ideas and socialist ideas. I think one of the main newspapers in France, it's like the New York Times, is called Liberation, Liberation. And it was started by Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, after he quit the Communist Party. He started his own Marxist newspaper that was, not really anti-imperialist, and it was called Liberation, and that's one of the main newspapers in France. L'Humanité, which is the daily newspaper of the French Communist Party, you find it on newsstands. It's just one of the other newspapers in France. And France is an imperialist country. France is a country that has huge corporations that make super profits exploiting countries in the developing world. France is a colonizer of Africa. France is a society where, you have all kinds of inequality, and it's a Western capitalist imperialist country, but it's never really been part of the imperialist club. And every so often, the fact that it's not respected by the British and the Americans, it comes out blatantly. For example, you'll remember that Israel murdered a French citizen in 1981. 1981, the French were helping Iraq to develop nuclear power, which Iraq had the right to do as a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But Israel was afraid that Iraq's nuclear power plant might turn into a nuclear weapons facility. So they bombed it, and there was a French citizen working there who they killed. France is a big supporter of nuclear power. France has huge nuclear power facilities. And the founder of the French nuclear power industry, which is government run, it's government run, was a member of the Communist Party. But the Western left hates nuclear power. I mean, just really, really hates it. If I remember correctly, Greenpeace, the British and American funded environmental organization, has gone out of its way to target the French, and the French have not responded in kind. And there's been instances where I think there's been Greenpeace activists that have been assassinated or killed by the French because they don't appreciate the British and the American oil companies telling them whether they can have nuclear power or not, and telling them how to run their economy. I remember very well, freedom fries. Do you remember that? When Bush lied and said that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and there weren't, and the USA invaded. One country that stood up to the United States very loudly was France. And Jacques Chirac, who was a French imperialist and colonizer, he got up and he said, no, this is a war based on lies. And in the United States, in Congress, they changed French fries to freedom fries. And there was a whole hate France campaign that I remember when I was a kid, hating France. I remember it from high school because France, they were not supporting the war in Iraq, and they were all socialists and traitors and all of this. So France is an imperialist country, but it is an imperialist country that to some degree or other has rival interests with American imperialism. And on top of that, it has in its identity is being a leftist, right? Is being, what we consider to be left aesthetics, the red flag, the notion of rising up, revolting against tyranny, the rights of man, etc., the rebellion aesthetic that communism very much attached itself to in the 20th century. That is very much part of the French national identity. So in France, you have had, and after the Second World War, during the Second World War, France was on the side of the British and the Americans and the Soviet Union against the Nazis. The Nazis invaded France and they occupied France. And in France, there was a resistance movement to the Nazis, and it was led by the communists. And they were called La Resistance. People talk about La Resistance or whatever. Yeah, well, it was all communists. Those were communists that were La Resistance. And they were blowing up railroads, and they were, carrying out underground attacks. And after the Second World War, the communists were wildly popular in France because they'd been the leaders of the fight against the Nazis. And after the Second World War, the communists, it appeared that, they were going to be part of the government, and they were elected, and they were part of a coalition government. And then the United States forced them out of the government in exchange for giving the country aid under the Marshall Plan. They forced the Communist Party to step down. And the French Communist Party was very, very much, and up to this day, the French Communist Party remains just very, very much part of the governing apparatus. And that, most people in France, most French families have one or two family members that are in the Communist Party or are in some communist group, Trotskyite, Maoist, anarchist, whatever. That left-wing politics, that now you get a lot of teenagers and a lot of people in their 20s who call themselves communists as part of their Facebook or whatever, but actual left-wing political organizations were much more part of French daily life, and even still today are very much part of French daily life. Now it gets complicated, though, because of the fact that we all know that after World War II, There were big divisions in the global communist movement. There was an uprising in France in May of 1968. There was a big uprising, national strikes, etc. The Communist Party was at the center of it, but so were a lot of different communist groups. And it obviously didn't lead to a revolution, but it was a huge uprising. And many looked at it as a situation where, I mean, you could have almost had a full-on civil war in France because the communists shut down the country with a general strike. They had so much support. And that then we also know that in 1978, there was the very famous declaration by the French Communist Party and the Italian Communist Party and the Communist Party of Spain, where they denounced the Soviet Union and they proclaimed themselves to be Euro-communists. And the United States considered that to be a huge victory. And it was actually Zbigniew Brzezinski who was credited with coming up with the term Euro-communist, Jimmy Carter's national advisor. And he said, well, we like the Euro-communists because they're against the Soviet Union, right? And the French Communist Party, that was huge, started taking anti-Soviet positions. And so did the Italian Communist Party. And that these parties, huge communist parties, had become corrupted. And how did this happen? Well, it was largely the result of meddling in French leftist politics by the CIA and by the American government. The CIA launched a program in the 1950s called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, where they were funding leftist and socialist ideas that were against the Soviet Union, but were also very middle class. And, they weren't economic populist socialism. They were more middle class alienation, right? And that you can read, this is a rabbit hole that I have gone down that nobody wants to ever talk about, right? The whole hippie thing, the hippie counterculture, rock and roll, modern art, that stuff didn't just come out of nowhere, right? There was a conscious effort by the British government and the American government to subsidize an aesthetic change. They promoted modern art as opposed to social realism. They promoted certain types of music, and they promoted certain ideas that became dominant in left-wing circles. They funded, various magazines. They set up the Paris Review, was a CIA-funded socialist magazine in Paris, in France, that promoted certain ideas. I believe it was the Paris Review that made James Baldwin, the African-American intellectual, famous because he was a Black American writer who was not a communist, right? And he was very much against racism in the United States, but he was anti-communist, and he did not speak about class struggle. He simply spoke about being oppressed, and as an African-American, it was, eventually, Pete Buttigieg's father, right? Pete Buttigieg's father was the guy who translated the notebooks of Antonio Gramsci, right? Pete Buttigieg's dad is just this, is this college professor in America, but he got the job of finding the notebooks, the prison notebooks of an Italian communist leader named Antonio Gramsci, and translating them into English and many other languages and making them standard reading in America, in colleges throughout Europe. And in Italy and in Germany and in France and all these places, they had these big conferences that were paid for by the CIA to promote Gramsci. And why did they promote Gramsci? Well, Gramsci was this legit Italian communist who Mussolini had thrown in jail. But in jail, your mail is censored, right? So he had to write his prison notebooks in code. He couldn't say exactly what he was thinking. He couldn't just say what was on his mind. He had to put it in code, number one. And Antonio Gramsci developed this whole theory about the cultural struggle rather than the class struggle, that it was rather a culture war. And he developed this theory of infiltrating cultural institutions, etc. And so the CIA started promoting the work of Antonio Gramsci as a way of changing what Marxism meant. And all of this culminated in 1978 when the French Communist Party, it's still around today, this huge communist party, it was dominated by college professors and intellectuals who were being covertly funded by the CIA. They didn't know it. They were just getting grant money to publish articles about white privilege or whatever, and they were being funded by the CIA. And after a while, all of this pressure eventually led to the French Communist Party changing its politics. And today, the French Communist Party is anything but a communist party. Right? When the U.S. imperialists and the British imperialists destroyed Libya and reduced the most prosperous country on the African continent to rubble and created a refugee crisis, the French Communist Party supported that. And when the French government went and bombed Mali, the French Communist Party supported that. The French Communist Party are big supporters of Ukraine and big advocates of sending weapons to Ukraine. The French Communist Party are not communists. And they're a big part of the coalition that just won the election. And I just got to tell you, the French Communist Party is not a communist party. It's a very big organization. It has a great history. Historically, they did great things fighting Hitler, and they were genuinely at one point a communist party. But especially after 1978, they are not a communist party. They are social democrats, like the British Labour Party. But what gets weird is that they are so powerful in France, and they're so much part of the political discourse that it's not simply, they're not just a political party for people that are against the government and call themselves communists. There's a big section of the French deep state that has heritage in the communist movement, and that's where it gets very, very weird, right? The French state is still an imperialist state, and the French government is still an imperialist government, but especially in the intelligence, the French intelligence services, there is actually, I would argue, an overrepresented role of Marxists, because intelligence services tend to promote art and tend to manage media and art, and intellectuals and academia. I would say that the French intelligence services, they're not all people that have like this weird historical relationship with the Communist Party, but I would say it's inflated because of the fact that intelligence agencies tend to focus on crafting narratives, media, etc. So in the French deep state, you have a lot of people who think that communism is part of their heritage, who hate the Soviet Union, hate China, but their parents were communists who like the Soviet Union or like China, and so they don't hate people that might think that way. They just hate those actual governments, and they're very confused. And there's a lot of that, right? And that feeds into why French imperialism and American imperialism don't always line up exactly. And that, during the 1990s and during the Bush administration, there was a real serious divide between French imperialism and American imperialism. And that resulted in French intelligence enhancing its influence in leftist circles very significantly. And one of the cases through which the French intelligence services were able to enhance their influence in America was the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Do folks know the name Mumia Abu-Jamal, right? Well, this is, he's an American guy who's in prison in Pennsylvania, right? He's, probably they consider him the world's most famous death row inmate, and Mumia Abu-Jamal. I believe Mumia Abu-Jamal is innocent. I don't think he committed the crime for which he was convicted. I think he was innocent. But the French government it is one of its stated missions and purposes this is Mumia Abu-Jamal. You've probably seen his face on t-shirts and stuff. He was convicted in 1982 of killing police officer, killing Anthony, what is his name? Anthony Faulkner. Police officer Anthony Faulkner was allegedly killed by Mumia Abu-Jamal. But the logistics show the bullets didn't come from his gun. There were multiple witnesses that saw another shooter. Those witnesses were threatened by the police out of testifying, and it's a whole case. But the French government is against the death penalty, right? I think it has something to do with the fact that the guillotine is like associated with France and their history. The French government is opposed to the death penalty. And so the French government and French intelligence has worked very, very hard. They worked really, really hard to highlight this case and to oppose the American government in executing Mumia Abu-Jamal. For example, in Paris, there is a street named after Mumia Abu-Jamal, the street Mumia Abu-Jamal in Paris. The mayor of Paris has made Mumia Abu-Jamal a French citizen. In fact, there are hundreds of cities in France that have made Mumia Abu-Jamal a citizen of their country. And when they were about to give the death penalty to Mumia Abu-Jamal in 1995, thousands of French people came to the United States and joined the protests in Philadelphia. And there was a huge amount of fundraising that went on in France, to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Now, I think that, stopping the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal, I mean, I think he was innocent. He's innocent of the crime. He's still in prison. He didn't get the death penalty, but I think stopping his execution was a good thing. I mean, that's a good thing that they did. So just because they did it doesn't mean it's bad, right? Just because France is an imperialist country and they made Mumia Abu-Jamal into a cause doesn't mean it's bad. Mumia is innocent, right? And the fact that they intervened to stop his execution, and this was like a rivalry between the American imperialists and the French imperialists, that's a good thing, right? And it also appears that during the Iraq War days, the French government, to some degree or other, we don't know exactly how it was done, but to some degree or other, the anti-war protest movement in the United States was subsidized and promoted by the French government. And you'll also remember that in 2004, when there was, George W. Bush ran for re-election, Michael Moore made the movie Fahrenheit 9/11. And the movie Fahrenheit 9/11 won the Palme d'Or at the French Cannes Film Festival. And they did a standing ovation for Michael Moore that lasted like 6 hours or something like that. And you'll also remember there's a British playwright named Harold Pinter. And Harold Pinter was, he's just a British playwright. He's written like experimental plays. He's a theater intellectual writer from Britain. But Harold Pinter, the French government went out of their way to honor him. He also received the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that Harold Pinter, when he received the highest honor they have in French, the Legion of Honor or whatever, and when he received the Nobel Prize, he gave a 3-hour tirade against George W. Bush and against the war in Iraq and stuff. And that there was a division among the imperialists, and the French imperialists were on one side and the US and the British imperialists were on another side. And the French, because they are an imperialist country, because they have, there's a lot of French billionaires, and the French imperialists have their own interest, and they have their own intelligence agencies that are tied in with the state. And those intelligence agencies have a left-wing orientation, a lot of them. And, the Communist Party is part of the government, etc. It appears that a lot of leftist politics in the West has very much become infiltrated by the French deep state to some degree or other. And the most blatant example of that is in Greece. The Greek Communist Party is one of the biggest communist parties in Europe, and they are now neutral in Ukraine. And they take the position that Russia is imperialist, that China is imperialist, that the fight between the United States and China and Russia is an inter-imperialist rivalry. And they have a plague on both your houses position, justified with some outrageous claims. They talk about the imperialist pyramid. Well, if you look at the leaders of the Greek Communist Party, they were all trained in France. And they were all trained by French Communist Party intellectuals that were being promoted by the CIA, like Louis Althusser and others. And that it appears that academics with ties to the French intellectual government-funded deep state have taken over and nudged the Greek Communist Party to become a pro-imperialist party. So all of this, I'm getting back to what's going on now. All of this leads to a situation where we have a big upset in France. Now, there's a couple things to remember about this victory for Mélenchon and the leftist coalition, right? The main party is Mélenchon's party, which is, what is his party called? I'm just going to pull up the name. I want to get his name, the name right. Yeah, the translation in English is a little bit off, right? He has his own political party, and it's like France Rising Up, or France something or other. What's the name of his party? It's called what is his party called? It's called the French Unbowed is the translation I'm seeing. The French Unbowed. And, that's the main party, but there's also the Communist Party of France. There's also various Trotskyite socialist groups, the Green Party, etc. And the coalition that they have set up, the National Popular Front is what it's called. They are the front runners in the election. Now, why? Well, you can really say that the primary factor in the victory or the plurality won by the French leftist coalition is the Palestine protests. That's the primary factor. And the reason for that is this, that the main anti-establishment party in France for the last decade has been the National Front, because the French government and the French academia and all that is very leftist sounding, and leftism is everywhere, and leftism has become associated with political correctness and wokeism and all the stuff that a lot of working class people hate. The bulk of the French working class that were against the establishment were voting for the National Front, because the National Front was promoting kind of economic populism, because the National Front was talking about migration and saying we don't want mass migration to take your jobs. The National Front was talking about leaving the European Union, etc. And the National Front, they have been the main party that people that are mad at the establishment in France vote for. Just like here in the United States, you don't vote for the left if you're mad, because the left are just defenders of the status quo. Instead, you vote for Trump. Well, people in France that are mad at the establishment, including a lot of Africans, including a lot of dark-skinned folks, there's plenty of people that are not white and that are not racist, are voting for Marine Le Pen because she's against the establishment. And she says, look, we need to protect the jobs of French workers. Look, mass migration is out of control. Look, the European Union isn't helping us. Look, why do we hate Russia? What did they ever do to us? It's not our job to go fight Russia and Ukraine. That's not our business. She's been the main person who says that. However, hating Muslims is a really, really big part of what she does. Marine Le Pen, part of the anti-opposition to mass migration in France is the idea that Islam is coming in. Islam is contrary to French values, right? Islam has women wear headscarves. Islam promotes autocratic ideas and religious government, things that go against the French way of life. And the National Front in France, even though people call them Nazis, which they are not, the National Front in France are big supporters of Israel. Well, right now, the Western imperialist countries are also big supporters of Israel. And many, many people who would have voted for Marine Le Pen in the context of the conflict in Gaza can't vote for her. Good question. In the context of the conflict in Gaza, they can't vote for her. If you're against the French imperialist establishment, you can't vote for Marine Le Pen, because the bulk of Marine Le Pen's identity is about hating Muslims and is about supporting Israel. And Marine Le Pen, she's like Donald Trump. She says offensive things. She's not politically correct. She's calling out the European Union. She seems all radical. Not no more. Now she seems just like another French puppet, because all of her rhetoric is about we got to support Israel against those Muslims. Very interesting. So Marine Le Pen has tanked. She's tanked because she at this point can't appear like an anti-imperialist, because she's not. She was never an anti-imperialist, but she was like Trump. She was a new rightist. The new right in Europe is the lower level capitalists that aren't part of the ultra monopolies that run the European Union, run Britain, run America. It's lower level capitalists trying to assert, the interest of the national economy of their independent country rather than overall, appealing to anti-immigrant sentiments, etc. And a lot of the support for lower level capitalists comes from Netanyahu Israelis, right? And you have to remember, Israel is a very divided place. Netanyahu represents a layer of Israel, and there's another layer of Israel that's very critical of Netanyahu. But I think Max Blumenthal, has talked about zygogarchs, and how a lot of the money for what they call conservatism incorporated comes from these zygogarchs, or these Israeli conservatives that might be more friendly to Russia, might be even more sympathetic to China, might be more anti-war, but blindly support Israel in the most pro, Netanyahu way. They don't just support Israel; they support Netanyahu. And that's why Tulsi Gabbard used to be this great anti-war voice, but as soon as stuff started going in Gaza, boom. RFK used to be a great anti-establishment voice. I still agree with a lot of what he says, but whenever it comes to Israel or Iran or anything related to Israel, boom. And that Marine Le Pen is like Tulsi Gabbard. She's like RFK, and that she's against the establishment, but she's got this attachment to Israel, and that discredits her because Israel is part of Western imperialism. And so, she's lost her credibility. And just like all over the world, there is a pro-Palestine upsurge. And in France, there's a lot of young French people who are not woke. A lot of them are Muslims they're not pro-LGBT. They're not they're not pro-abortion. They're not, into the rainbow flag culture. They're just, they're conservative in their own way, but they're anti-Israel. And they ain't going to vote for Marine Le Pen. The way she talks about Israel, they ain't going to vote for her. And this has created a situation where the French National Front, that was kind of the symbol of anti-establishment politics in France, has lost its credibility. And that's the main thing people are talking about the French election here, right? Is that the right wing, which was the anti-establishment force that was being, and they were the ones the media was hysterically against. Right? The media was hysterically against Marine Le Pen, just like they're hysterically against Trump here, right? If Trump gets in, we're all going to die. Agenda 2025. Oh my God. It's all bullshit. Okay. Right? Project 2025. It's the stupid fear mongering. Trump is a Nazi. Trump is Hitler. Anyone who doesn't line up behind Biden's a Nazi. Right? Everyone, they were doing the same thing to Marine Le Pen, and it didn't work. And she was getting more popular because people in France, just like here, don't like to see their living standards go down, don't like to see their wages go down, don't like the crazy political correctness that's being imposed on people, don't like the cancel culture, don't like what social media is doing to their children's brains. And working class people resent what's being imposed on them by the liberal order. And Marine Le Pen looked like she was against it, but she doesn't no more. And so that's created this situation where, what do you do? Now, Mélenchon, my jaw dropped when I saw that Mélenchon and the French National Front won the elections. It dropped mainly because I assumed that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, was frozen in his position as like the permanent opposition figure in France, right? He's been getting about 10, 15% in every election ever. And he's just there's a certain layer of French society that is communist, and it's a big chunk of the population because of France's history, etc. But what does it mean to be a communist anymore? Communism is very confusing. The French Communist Party is not so great and whatever, but he's Mr. Communism in France, and they have him on the stage at the debate to show that, yes, see, this is part of our culture, right? It's almost like the way Mormonism is part of being an American. Mormons are not a very big percentage of American population. They're not a majority, but they're an essential part at this point. So we have Mitt Romney in Congress. Utah is a state, and it's like, if you want to talk about America, part of America is Mormonism. Well, part of France is communism. So we got Mitt Romney in Congress. We got Mélenchon. It's just like Mormonism is part of America. Communism with anti-imperialist characteristics, is part of being a French person, or is part of French society. But that's not the case. Looks like Mélenchon and his forces, they're looks like they are going to be governing France. And this is interesting to me. Now this is where I have to point out the nuance here. Mélenchon has a record of saying good things about forces around the world. When Crimea voted to join with Russia, he defended that. And he said, look, they voted to join. Look, the Nazi forces in Ukraine, they overthrew the government. The people in Crimea have the right. That's big. Now, he denounced Russia's special military intervention, but he said it was the fault of NATO, and it was NATO's fault that it happened. That's big. And Mélenchon himself has been largely, if you look on the internet, he's accused of being a Russian puppet, a Putin supporter, etc. That's Mélenchon, the individual. George Galloway respects him. A lot of legit anti-imperialist people around the world respect Mélenchon. Even though he goes back and forth, they respect him. He supported Julian Assange. In his speech, in the aftermath of the vote, he said the first thing that France must do is recognize a Palestinian state, and there's jubilation about that. That's all good. But if you look at the parties that are part of his coalition, they're not anywhere near where he's at. The French Communist Party its members have actually voted to send weapons to Ukraine. Like I said, the French Communist Party supported the bombing of Libya, etc. Also environmentalism, eco-fascism is a big part of the platform of the French National Popular Front. All right, the idea that we need to have less. Everyone needs to be poorer to save the environment and degrowth. That's a big part of their agenda also. Obviously support for labor unions, which I'm all about, is part of their platform as well. But it's the French Communist Party that has long ago been discredited. It's a lot of Trotskyite and Maoist groups, various little tiny sects that exist. It's Mélenchon's organization that does take some pretty anti-imperialist stances sometimes, not consistently. It's the Green Party of France, which, don't get me started, right? It's all over the place. And I was talking to somebody, a good friend of mine. I'm sure he doesn't want to be named, but I was talking to him, and this is somebody his family is from France, has been to France, speaks French fluently, studies French politics. And he said that the main thing that struck him about this is that the French communists, it looks like they have scored a win here. They scored a win on the one hand because of the French right discrediting itself around the issue of Israel and Palestine and being just blind supporters of Israel. And they also scored a win because they are anti-establishment. But the important thing to remember is that the bulk of the people who voted for the French Communist Party and the bulk of the appeal the French Communist Party makes is not a working class appeal. And that is dangerous. Right? And that it is true that the French Communist Party and the French National Popular Front, they are appealing to people not on the basis of being working class people, not on the basis of not wanting their wages to go down, not on the basis of not wanting to fight, the Russians and Ukraine, but wanting to fight the big bankers back home, not on the basis of populist opposition to the low-wage police state. They're having a low-wage police state in France, just like they're having it over here. Not on the basis of opposing a new world war, but in the name of this kind of vague cultural liberalism, right? And that even though their founding documents and the labor union, there's a working class side to the National Front or the National Popular Front, there's also a very wokeified side, right? And that this is almost like if Jeremy Corbyn had been elected in Britain. It would have been the same kind of situation. It's almost like if Bernie Sanders had become president of the United States. On the one hand, they still appeal. Bernie Sanders' whole thing was appealing to the 99% and the 1%, the people who've been left behind by the millionaires and billionaires. But you know that in the Bernie camp, there was a huge layer of people. There was a huge layer of people that were in charge. They weren't just in the Bernie camp. They were in charge, that were totally pro-imperialist, totally wokeified, totally obsessed with the LGBT thing, totally into cancel culture. And it's a contradiction. So we have a situation where the middle class left saw an opening after the defeat, the failure of the French New Right. They saw an opening and they jumped into it. But they're bringing with them all of the toxic poison pills of the synthetic left. I was looking at what some of the people that are supporters of Alexander Dugin and some of the people around Dugin and his movement in Russia were saying about the election results. And they said that they don't see this as a victory of Mélenchon. They see this rather as the fact that the French National Front of Le Pen has failed to become a real anti-liberal movement. The French National Front is basically just a group of Muslim haters, even though there's a lot of people in the French National Front that want more from it than that want it to be about economic nationalism, that want it to be about opposing the establishment, that want it to be about all kinds of different things. The bulk of the leadership of the French National Front has made their group just about, we hate Muslims. And that ain't going to cut it. Right? And the French National Front, their whole identity, their whole image, aside from whatever else they were appealing to, people's anti-establishment sentiments, people's opposition to the European Union, whatever, that everything they did came with a huge giant shovel of, we hate Muslims. And when Israel is aligned with American imperialism and fighting Iran and fighting the Palestinians, if your message is we hate Muslims, you ain't going anywhere. And that the French National Front, that's the end, right? Yes, and you were right about that. The French National Front is at the end of its rope. It's done, because they cannot escape the fact that they are Zionists and they're ethnic bigots. They don't like a religious group, right? There is a religion that they preach hatred for in the most cringe Zionist ways. And they just can't get over that. And that attaches them to the liberal order, and they're doomed. I think that's a great point that Dugin and his allies are making. So in this context, I am first of all, I'm not doing what a lot of people that are just internet people are going to do and just go, oh, it's bullshit. This is just another AOC. No, this isn't that. Mélenchon has a very good record, and the French Communist Party, despite all its flaws, it has a very good history. It is historically linked to Stalin. It is historically linked to the Communist International, and they have big trade unions in France, and they have sit-down strikes and factory occupations, and it's complicated. So you can't just poo-poo this. This is big on the one hand. But I'm not just blindly applauding for this, because I'm reading the platform of these French political parties, and I'm seeing lots of toxic stuff, like the trans obsession, like environmental degrowthism, like anti-China, anti-Russia stuff. On top of that, I'm noticing that the French establishment is not screaming like it's Armageddon. If Marine Le Pen had won, they'd be screaming like, oh my God, it's the end of freedom. And they're not doing that. Why are they not doing that? Right? If this is a legit victory for anti-imperialism, the imperialists should be screaming from the heavens about it being the end of the world. And I'm not seeing that. And in fact, I'm seeing on the New York Times and other places, they're saying, well, this is a victory for anti-fascism. There's no danger of fascism in France. Marine Le Pen is not a fascist. Marine Le Pen is just somebody that's opposed to the liberal order. And she does it in a way that it's losing its effectiveness. So at this point, I see danger ahead. So I am going to say what needs to be said here, which is that if Mélenchon has any hope of doing something right, if he has any hope of staying in power, if he has any hope of keeping the loyalty of the French people, he needs to de-wokeify his movement, and he needs to appeal to the working class. Only the working class can be mobilized to defeat the European Union, to defeat NATO, to defeat imperialism. Only the working class. The millions of French workers that are they have much more of an activist tradition with their unions, with the yellow vests, with all of that. Only the working class can be relied on. And that if Mélenchon is going to get anything done in terms of improving living standards, in terms of getting the deep state, pulling France out of the whole Ukraine thing, separating France from NATO, if he's going to get any of that done, he must appeal to the working class, and he's got to start getting the woke people out of his coalition. The woke college professors are not going to help you. Only the working class can help you. And you need, Mélenchon, you need to start improving working people's lives, and you need to start de-wokeifying your movement, de-wokeifying your party, and you need to make them hate you. Right? The reason people were voting for Marine Le Pen is because the snobs at Libération and the mainstream media of France hated her. Make them hate you the same way they hate Marine Le Pen. That's what you need to do, Mélenchon. Make them hate you in the same way they hate her. Give up political correctness. Give up the LGBT stuff. Give up the obsession with abortion. Give up the obsession with using the right pronouns. Give up the eco-degrowth crap and start raising the wages of French workers. Make it easier for French people to feed their kids and have a better life for their families. Give up trying to please the anti-China and Russia crowd and say our real enemy is these big bankers at home. Use the French government to whatever degree you can get it to kick the ass of bankers and Wall Street monopolies and huge oil companies, and become a legit populist movement. Make socialism populist again. That is what you've got to do, Mélenchon, if you want to stay in power and if you don't want to get swept away. All right? I don't know Mélenchon personally. I am appealing to him purely on a selfish basis. I'm not even trying to talk to him about right and wrong and all of that. If he's a selfish politician, if he wants to win, if he wants to keep the trust of the French people, he needs to go to war with the French establishment, and that includes the woke wing of the French establishment. That includes the pronoun police. That includes the rich college professors. That includes the Althusser fan club and the Jean-Paul Sartre reading clubs. Go to war. Go to war with the bankers. Go to war with the imperialists. Go to war with NATO. Go to war with the European Union. And give up trying to please the woke institutions that you have this unhealthy attachment to. That is your only hope, Mélenchon. That is what I'm telling you, right? You have potential, and George Galloway loves you and respects you, and a lot of people that I respect and look up to, and people see this as a big win for Russia against imperialism because of the good things you've said. And I'm not going to throw you under the bus, but I'm not going to pretend I don't see all the problems here. And I got to tell you that if communism is associated with wokeism, it is doomed, because wokeism is anti-working class. Wokeism is anti-working class. The working class struggle says that our real enemy is at home. Our real enemy is the billionaires and the bankers and the big tech monopolies. And that rather than fighting China or Russia or Cuba or Iran, we should be fighting the imperialists. The working class movement, working class politics says that jobs and schools and education are what working class people need, and wages should go up and living standards should go up. Working class politics says that we don't need a police state to spy on us, and we also don't need to be told what to say. We shouldn't be cutting off our family members because of what they believe, that religion is a very important part of life and should be respected, whatever religious beliefs people have, and that people shouldn't be shamed for being religious. Working class values says that people may be LGBT or people may be transgender, but that's their business, and the government and schools have no business forcing that on anybody, just like they would have no business persecuting anyone for it. They should also have no business promoting it. Right? And that's a personal thing that families deal with on their own, that people go through in their own way, that communities deal with, and that the government doesn't have an agenda, shouldn't have an agenda of trying to promote that kind of thing, just like it shouldn't be persecuting people around that kind of thing either. Right? And that these are working class politics. Woke politics is not working class politics. And the cutting edge division is growth. Right? Working class people want a better life. In fact, everyone wants a better life. The lower level capitalists who support the new right, they want a better life. They want economic growth. The only people that want degrowth are the people that are already at the top of the pyramid. The ultra monopolies, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the ultra monopolists, Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum, Warren Buffett, people like that, they want degrowth because they want to stay at the top of the pyramid. And they want to freeze human history so they stay at the top. And that's why they want to crush Russia. They want to crush China. They want to crush Venezuela. And they also want to crush you. And they want to crush your family. They want to crush your community. And they want the whole world to be forced down so that they can stay at the top. And humanity will not accept being degrown. Humanity will never accept being degrown because the very nature of what it means to be a human being is wanting economic growth and wanting development. Humanity will not be canceled. Humanity will not be degrown. And countries around the world are rejecting globalism, imperialism, capitalism in its monopolistic stage, the highest stage of capitalism, the system of degrowth and an international financial oligarchy. And countries all over the world are breaking out of that system, and they are developing. And people in the Western countries are rejecting the sinister high-tech dark ages that system is offering. And if you can attach yourself to the global movement against it and the domestic movement against it, you can win, Melanchon. But if you halfway it, you're doomed. If people don't see improvements in their lives, if people don't see things get better, they're going to push you aside just like they did Marine Le Pen. Right? And you have to show you mean it if you oppose the establishment. And I pretty soon we're going to open up for questions. We've already got, some super chats. I think there's some Rumble rants. No Rumble rants yet, but some super chats. But let me just say this. Whatever happened to good old-fashioned Bolshevik agitating? Whatever happened to good old-fashioned class struggle rhetoric? Whatever happened to that? Not talking about intersectionality, not talking about white privilege, not talking about who's the most oppressed, but talking about how we can rise up together. There was a time in this country that if somebody was unemployed, they'd be walking around and they would see a guy on a soapbox and he'd say, "Are you unemployed, young man? You're unemployed. I'll tell you about a country where no single person is unemployed. Not a single person is unemployed." And that might be a poor country. They might not have a huge amount of wealth, but every single person's labor power is utilized, and they're building right now, and they're constructing, and I'll tell you all about it. And we could have the same thing here if the black and the brown and the white and the yellow and the Latino and the Asian, and we all came together to defeat the bankers. We could have the same thing right over here, brother, and I'm going to tell you all about it, and I want you to sign up. There was a time when people who were struggling heard that message. There was a time where
some teenage kid would be walking down the street in his neighborhood, and there'd be a guy on a soapbox, and he would shout at him, "Hey, is that a Superman comic you got there, kid? Well, let me tell you about the real Man of Steel. Let me tell you about the man who defeated Hitler. Let me tell you about the man who raised the Soviet people up. Let me tell you about the man who got you your Social Security and got you health insurance. I'll tell you about the real Man of Steel, the Superman in Moscow. I'll tell you about him, and I'll sign you up to join an organization that'll fight for jobs and schools and education in your neighborhood, that has done more to fight racism than any other organization in this country's history. Let me sign you up." There was a time where there were people who talked that way. Whatever happened to that? I am not a dogmatist. I believe in God. I believe that markets have a place in 21st century socialism. I've studied Deng Xiaoping theory and the achievements of China and Vietnam. I am not a dogmatist, but God damn it, give me that old time communism. Give me that old time communism. Give me that old time communism. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for me. God damn it. Give me the street preaching, Bolshevik agitating that said our real enemy is here at home. Don't go fight in a boss's war. Black and brown and white unite against the racist parasites that run our system. Give me that old-time Bolshevik agitating. Give me that old-time Bolshevism. Give me that radical working-class politics that says jobs and schools for the people, not billions for war in the Pentagon. Give me that old-time Bolshevik rhetoric that said you ought to own the factory that you work in. It said we need a government that kicks the ass of the bankers, that kicks the ass of Wall Street, that fights for working people in your community. Give me that old-time Bolshevism that said the bank has no right to kick you out of your home, that you can kick the bank out of your home, you can fight the bailiffs, you can stop the eviction. Give me that old-time Bolshevism. Give me that old-time Bolshevism that said don't starve, fight. That we have no obligation to get poorer and suffer for a crisis that a group of billionaire monopolists created, and that they wrecked this country and they can pay to fix it. We should not have to pay for the crisis that they created. Do not make the working class pay for what the billionaires and the bankers did with their greed. That we built this country with our sweat and with our labor, and that we have a right to own it. And we now stand outcast and starving amid the wonders we have made, but it is our labor power and our sweat and blood that built this nation. And someday we are going to kick the ass of Wall Street. We are going to mobilize and we are going to rebuild this country from the bottom up with working class popular power. We're never going to die in a boss's war. We're never going to die to help Wall Street colonize some nation around the country. The only war that we want to die in is a war against Wall Street, against the Pentagon, and a war based on the love of our communities and our working class brothers and sisters against their greed. Whatever happened to that? Whatever happened to old-fashioned Bolshevik agitating? Whatever happened to old-fashioned working class politics? Give me that old-time communism. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for me. And I can guarantee you that Mélenchon, as old as he might be, and as much as he's got CIA Gramsci and woke crap floating around his brain, he knows that old-time communism. They know that old-time communism in France. They know how to have a sit-down strike in France. They know how to occupy their factories in France. They know about boss napping in France. They know about solidarity actions with Algeria in France. They know the old-time communism. They know it. They know it. They know it. And that's what Mélenchon needs if he wants to stay in power. And so he better find that old-time communism. He better dig it up. He better go to the French University Library and get some old dusty copies of the writings of Maurice Thorez or what was his name? Jacques Duclos. He needs to go to the library and dust off some old agitational literature from some real revolutionaries. That's the only hope you've got, Melanchon. I'm telling you this as someone who wants you to do well. That is the only hope you got, right? If you are going to take power, if you're going to be the elected leader running French imperialism at a time like this, you need to go and rediscover that old time communism. You need to dust that off, and you need to tell the woke people to go to hell. And that's the only advice I can give you. And I'm telling you that as a friend. I'm telling you that as somebody who wants you to do well. I'm telling you that as someone who wants you to succeed. And I'm telling you that as somebody who wants you to be remembered by history as a good leader, as someone who carries out good achievements. That is my advice to you, Melanchon. I hope you hear it. And that, folks, is what our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is trying to do. We're trying to revive these class struggle politics. We are trying to bring back the politics that fought for working families and against wars. And if you like what we're doing, if you like what we have to say, join the Center for Political Innovation. We need more members. We got plenty of work to do. We're having a convention in a year. It's going to be awesome. So on that note, folks, names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Bob in Troy, New York. Welcome, Bob. Jeff in Brazil. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Harry in Florida. Nate in Chicago. Cleveland, Ohio. Alex Rickle, Tampa. Joshua Tree, California. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Utah. Thrashbeard. Sahel Alliance. John in Honolulu. Bogota, Colombia. Alex in Brazil. Patrick in Maine. Tony in Tasmania. Jeff in Lindsay. Nick in Vegas. Vancouver. Welcome, welcome. Colin in Greensboro. South Africa. Harry in Melbourne. Phil in Scablands. Kano in Sierra Leone, Mosin in Denver, Anthony in Detroit, Chad in Spokane, Washington, Ed in Louisville, Kentucky, Ryan in Kansas City, Tyblee in Pennsylvania, Sacramento, Stephen Ann in Ringgold, Georgia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Craig in Perth, Australia, Finn in Duluth, Gabby in Chicago, Carlo in Ireland, Mariah in North Carolina. Names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Sherry in Cape May. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Kansas City has awesome music. Very, very good. Very, very good, folks. Well, folks, mark your calendar for July 12th, 2025. Chicago area. It's a long way away, still over a year, but this is going to be one of the most important days in your life because we are going to do something amazing in Chicago on July 12th, 2025. Mark your calendar, start making travel arrangements. We're doing it. We are going to build a mega anti-imperialist rally in Chicago, July 12th, 2025. We need you there. We need you to help us build it. We're going to do a lot of events surrounding it. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead because our work is necessary. We want to get the job done. We're not competing with anybody. We're not a party. You can be a member of any party and be a member of the Center for Political Innovation. We want to get the job done. We are getting the job done. And that job is educating people. That job is getting out of the movement to the masses and spreading anti-imperialist working class politics. We are getting the job done. And if you want to do the job with us, we need your help. July 12th, 2025. It's a Saturday. It'll be in the Chicago area. Make arrangements to come to Chicago for a few days. We've got so much that needs to be done. We need to have an mega anti-imperialist working class event. So you've got a whole year to plan it. You've got a whole year to make arrangements. Now is the time to do it, right? And shout out to our Chicago comrades. They are great folks. They just had a meeting today. It's not Chicago, it's Midwest. They were in Milwaukee, if I understand correctly, that the meeting happened. And they had a meetup today. I think there's some people that I just read in the chat that are in this picture. Our Chicago folks, or our Midwest folks had a meetup. There they are. Look at that. All different generations, all different backgrounds. They had a meetup in Chicago to talk about their plans. And, and good for them. And, these folks are going to be doing a lot of work in the coming months. They're going to be doing a lot of work. And so shout out to them. And I'm really, really excited for everything that we've got ahead. And we just got to remain optimistic. We got to remain optimistic. We got to remember why we're in this. And as I said earlier, morning messages, folks, right? CPI, we do the morning messages. We do them. We're trying to do them every morning to inspire people, give some revolutionary hope and optimism. We got one lined up for tomorrow. Every morning we try to inspire with a morning message. So, we put them on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. We try to have a morning message. So we need more. And if you want to send a morning message, if you want to submit a morning message of your own, we're obviously going to watch it first. If you say obscene things or are preaching racial bigotry or something like that, we may not post it. But if you are somebody who's sympathetic to what we do here and you want to submit a morning message, you can send the video file through this link. If you want to submit a morning message, we take morning message submissions via this great link. I never would have thought of doing this, but the great Peter Coffin is brilliant in so many ways. He had the idea of setting up a link. So just record your video, upload your video on this thing, and it goes directly to us, and we'll handle it from there. And if it meets our standards of approval, we will put it on the CPI YouTube channel. So if you'd like to send a morning message, submit one, you can send it here. You can submit a morning message. So we always do appreciate that. We always do appreciate that. So on that note, I am going to start answering people's super chat and Rumble rant questions. I guess it's only super chat questions. So I see a couple more super chats have come in. Super chats, not only are they a great way to get me talking in the second half of the program, but super chats also support the work that I do here. They do support this YouTube channel. And let me just say this, right? We have taken an interesting turn in the last couple days. I used to say over and over again on these streams, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I don't say that shit no more because I think the internet is a lost cause. We are not going to win the internet, and I just don't care about the internet anymore. My whole life is about the organization that I'm building, the Center for Political Innovation. I'm done trying to win the internet, and the internet is rigged. I'm allowed to say that now because the person who said I wasn't allowed to say that is gone. But the internet is rigged, and it is completely rigged and good because it's time for the training wheels to come off. It's time for the training wheels to come off. There are no excuses now. We've got to build the in real life organization. We've got to build a real organization, the Center for Political Innovation. And we just have to recruit ordinary people, and we have to go out and find people who would never go looking for this kind of thing and get them to come to our events and win them over. And that's not easy and it's difficult, but Gabby has been doing the work, right? She's been going to the meetups and meeting people. She's been, people have been going to parades. People went to July 4th parades all across the country this week. And they went to July 4th parades and they handed out these palm cards with our 4-point plan on them. And they gave people flag pins. You wouldn't believe what people have been doing around the country. People believe in this project. People believe in it. That's why it exists, right? And I am proud that I can inspire with my energy and with my passion. I am proud that I can inspire people to do what's necessary. And I'm really excited for what's happening in 1 year, the anti-imperialist mega rally that we are doing in 1 year. But right now we got to build, and CPI members are being mobilized to go get contacts and go do outreach. And it's not easy. It's a thankless job. And there's a lot of people who will tell you to go F off. And there's a lot of people who aren't going to be interested. But we have to just start finding people that are looking for something, right? 9 out of 10 people, for whatever reason, they're not looking. But there's a lot of people right now that don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe for a while they were a Bernie supporter and they don't know what to believe. Maybe for a while they were a Trump supporter and they don't know what to believe. Maybe for a while they were all kinds of things. They were a flat earther, they were whatever. They don't know what to believe. That's who we need to talk to. And we need to bring them to our in real life event. And that's what we need to do. That's what I'm all committed to doing. And the internet and leftism, and I'm way past all of it. Right? I'm way past all of it. I'm not going to win the internet. I'm not going to win. The only way we can do what we need to do is to build our organization. And I got to tell you, there is something beautiful and spiritual about what we do at the Center for Political Innovation. I think I can acknowledge that, right? As much as, Marxism is a materialist philosophy, very atheistic, sees religion as an institution that oppresses people and preaches, superstition. But I am a Christian, and I do believe there is something deeply spiritual about what we are doing here. I believe that we are a continuation of what Christianity was originally intended to be, the movement of the proletariat, the men of no property, those with nothing but their family, right? That is originally what Christianity was meant to be, against a brutal, dying empire, the Roman Empire. We are the Christians of the 21st century. We are keeping alive the message of Jesus Christ. That is what we are doing, right? And that communism, despite all of its great achievements, you cannot build God's heaven on earth. You cannot build God's kingdom on earth without God. And that on top of that, you cannot carry out the mission of Jesus if you think that people can starve while billions are spent on wars. You cannot carry out the mission of Jesus while you're mobilizing to send weapons to Ukraine or Israel, right? That Christianity needs to be saved from capitalism and imperialism, and communism needs to be saved from pessimism, wokeism, and cold materialism, right? We have come to rescue communism from the cold, spiritless atheism, and we have come to rescue Christianity from its attachment to imperialism and its heartlessness and its disregard of the economic needs of the people. We are doing something that is very nuanced and exciting, and we are building a socialism that is about love and brotherhood and community. It's about optimism and construction, not destruction. It's not about unleashing people's rage. It's about connecting people to each other in a movement of love and brotherhood and optimism and growth and construction. We are doing something amazing here. And I want you to be part of it, the Center for Political Innovation. And I ain't going to stop doing it. And nobody is going to stop me from doing it. Nobody is going to stop me from building, constructing, and continuing to do what I was meant to do. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. Longtime friend Terry, who's up in Portland, she says, "Nous sommes le pouvoir," which means we are the power. I would agree. It is we, the working people of this world, with our labor power, who produce the world's wealth. Human labor and nature is the source of all wealth. And the French do have a great tradition. And despite all the weirdness of French leftism and how it has lost its way and all of that, there still is popular labor support there. And there still is a lot of people in France with an anti-imperialist and anti-colonial perspective. So it would be a huge mistake to just poo-poo what happened. And Mélenchon has taken heroic anti-imperialist stances around Crimea, around some other things. So, we have to view this rationally. But if we don't acknowledge the problems that are there, we're also making a big mistake. Thanks for all the content and everything you do. Oh, well, thank you, Mosin. Thoughts on Interpol based in France and its relevance today? Well, look, the International Criminal Court, and Interpol is international police, but the International Criminal Court, Interpol, a lot of this stuff, George Soros was a big supporter of all of this, right? And George Soros is this Hungarian billionaire who was very key in overthrowing socialism in the Eastern Bloc. He was very key in creating the color revolution apparatus. But I understand that he also has kind of a weird, like, he's critical of the United States. He's a liberal, right? I mean, I understand he supports Leonard Peltier, the Native American political prisoner. Good. He supported Mumia Abu-Jamal. Good. But, you know, George Soros was the main advocate for creating the International Criminal Court. And that the International Criminal Court, first there was the International Criminal Tribunal around Yugoslavia. That was in The Hague, but that's different. But the actual International Criminal Court, every single person that it has ever convicted has been African. Every single one. And I mean, the International Criminal Court was and remains a colonial institution. And one of the biggest opponents of it was the man I used to work for, used to deliver food to his house, Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General. And he pointed out that if the International Criminal Court had existed, or there'd been any talk of it at the time the UN was created, the UN never would have existed. It is an attack on the sovereignty of every country in the world. And the U.S. imperialists, they can see that. And every so often, the International Criminal Court starts making some noise about U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan or whatever, and then they make noise against it, you know, and Israel doesn't particularly care for the International Criminal Court. So they know that it's potentially used against them, but that doesn't make it any more credible as an institution. Just because they make some noise against Israel or make some noise against the United States every so often doesn't make them credible. The International Criminal Court, Interpol, these institutions need to be abolished. They have no legitimacy internationally. None. They have no legitimacy internationally. They need to go. Right? You know, I mean, they need to be abolished. And that, again, the French imperialists, the German imperialists, the Belgian and Italian imperialists, they're all still imperialists. Right? They are in some ways at odds with the American imperialists. And look, I think, in my opinion, right? And again, people may not agree with this, and it didn't sell very well, honestly. But if you really want to learn what I believe and where I stand on things in a nuanced, careful way, I would recommend that you go and you read the book that I wrote. It was like written in the form of a letter to the leader of a small communist sect in America. Go and read my book, Letter to Bob Avakian. Go read this book, right? I think this is the best book I ever wrote, which maybe it doesn't have a mass appeal. I didn't write it to make money. I didn't write this book to make a lot of money. I wrote this book to, you know, explain my perspective and use the art of the polemic to explain my perspective, right? And you can get the book on Amazon. This is the best book I ever wrote. And in Letter to Bob Avakian, I talk about how Bob Avakian more or less became a shill of French intelligence, right? And how he became a puppet of the French imperialists. Right. And I talk about how that happened. And I talk about his strengths, why he was very, very effective. But go and read Letter to Bob Avakian. It is the best book that I ever wrote because I first of all, I go over what he did right, what he was good at, his real strengths. And I critique his worldview and how his worldview is very, very much. I'm glad somebody likes it. Letter to Bob Avakian is your best, in my opinion. Thank you. You must have really read it. I think this is the best book I ever wrote. And in this book, I talk a lot about French imperialism. And I talk about the corrupting influence of French imperialism. And I talk about wokeism. And I talk about a lot of different things. And I talk about my belief in God and my reconversion experience and how I returned to Christianity. And I would encourage you to read this book, Letter to Bob Avakian. Go and read it. Read it for yourself. And in that book, I go into great detail and I talk about the inter-imperialist rivalry. Look, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was very clear that French intelligence infiltrated and in the 1990s came to dominate a lot of left-wing spaces because the French imperialist state was opposed to the death penalty in America. It was opposed to a lot of U.S. foreign policy. And so the French imperialists were able to infiltrate and sink their fingers into various left-wing spaces. And it wasn't a problem at first, or it wasn't as apparent at first, I should say, because on Iraq, on Mumia, on a lot of things, they were on the right side. But after Obama got into office, I remember Obama went to Berlin for his campaign, And you remember Obama's whole thing was repairing the relationship with Europe. After Obama got in, everyone who had been, co-opted by French intelligence lost their way, because the French are imperialists, right? And I mean, it happened. And that, look, the Soviet Union had been a huge layer of support for left-wing movements around the world. And when the Soviet Union was gone, a lot of people were confused. They didn't know what to do. And leftism, got very much, we saw the rise of democracy now, and, the rise of all kinds of political currents in the 90s. So yeah, there you go. So I hope that answers your question, Mosen. Yeah, the Interpol is not a legit institution. The International Criminal Court is not legitimate. And there are differences between the French imperialists and the British and American imperialists. And sometimes that causes the French imperialists to do good things. That doesn't mean they're right. And we should oppose that in every way. How is the National Front? How different is the National Front from our MAGA Republican Party? Isn't this the same ideology, more or less? It is. What's different about it is that the National Front is more ideological. Right? Donald Trump just gets up there and freestyles, and Donald Trump, it's just, hey, but the National Front, they very much, because French people are much more scholarly and bookish and much more academic in their approach to politics. Because of that, there is, they very much attach themselves to nationalism and the history of French nationalism. Now, my understanding is that the actual far-right party of France is called the National Rally, if I remember correctly. And they're like the legit far-right party in France that I believe was started by Marine Le Pen's father. And they are like, fascists, basically. I mean, I shouldn't even say fascist, because fascism is a practice. It's not an ideology. But they have far-right ideology, right? They're like nationalist, far-right nationalist elements that make sympathetic statements toward fascism in the 20th century. Fascism is not what you believe, it's what you do. And fascism is about economic degrowth. But I believe the National Rally is the straight up far-right party. National Front, under the leadership of Le Pen, is an attempt to appeal to anti-immigrant sentiments and stuff, but it kind of waters down. They're not fascists. They're not admirers of Mussolini. They are, they're against immigration. They're supporters of Israel. They emphasize a French way of life, French culture. They're against the European Union. It is very, very similar. It is more or less the politics of Donald Trump, but it is presented in a much more academic and ideological way, because that's much more the French way. The French people, they just are more politically engaged. That's changing. I will say American politics is changing a lot, right? It's changing a lot because of access to the internet, because the next generation of young people have a lot of questions. But, historically, the French people have much more of a tradition of being like political, in an academic, bookish way than the American people do. So you're not going to get a French politician that talks the same way Trump talks. They may have similar rhetoric, similar goals, appealing to similar sentiments, but it's going to look different. Marine Le Pen sounds a lot different than Trump, though her message is roughly the same. And, she has a heritage. I mean, her father was a very, very important far-right figure in French politics. There you go. All right. I think Trump is the preference Zionist candidate. Chase, I think you're right. Trump is going to win the upcoming election. He's going to win. How much will it improve things? I don't know. I tend to think he's kind of the lesser of two evils, but I mean, he says so many bad things about Palestine and stuff. I mean, he talks a little better on Russia. He says he would clean up the war in Ukraine. That sounds good. But I feel like, on the one hand, Trump wouldn't be running if he thought he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail, right? As much as, people want to idealize Trump, don't idealize Trump. If Trump thought he was going to die in prison, he wouldn't be in this election. Right? Trump is only running because he has some kind of guarantee that he doesn't die in prison. That's my belief. And number two, Donald Trump, I am convinced they wouldn't really let him be a candidate at this point. And the Supreme Court wouldn't have ruled in his favor and all of that if there wasn't an understanding that if he gets in, he will be he will be less anti-establishment than when he was in his first term. I think there's a very good chance that Trump will be less anti-establishment than he was in his first term. I'm not thrilled about a Donald Trump second term because it's going to be bad on a lot of fronts. But, anything would be better than Biden right now. I mean, Biden is running this country into the ground economically, politically, marching us toward World War III. Biden doesn't know what he's doing. And I think that Donald Trump's ego, Donald Trump is a total narcissist, but that narcissism is to our benefit because Donald Trump wants to be remembered in history. The only reason he went and met with Kim Jong-un is because he wanted to be remembered. He wanted there to be a historical photograph. Donald Trump doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who started World War III. Donald Trump doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who made life in the country worse. And I think for his own selfish reasons, Trump is likely to do more good than Biden or Kamala Harris. And don't get me started about Kamala Harris. I think that Donald Trump, I don't think that Donald Trump has pure intentions. I think Donald Trump's murder of Qasem Soleimani, Donald Trump's pandering to Israel, Donald Trump, the way he stabbed Julian Assange in the back. I think Donald Trump, his first term wasn't great. And I think there's a good chance his second term will probably be worse. But you have to admit it was better than Biden. I mean, it was better than Biden. And so I'm not campaigning for Trump. I'm not endorsing Trump. But, I think you're right, Chase, when you say that, I think that there's been an understanding that he will win the next election. I think that unless things are a lot crazier than I expected, I think Donald Trump will be president come next January. That is what I believe is likely to occur. Mélenchon's coalition New Popular Front does want to raise the minimum wage, good, and lower the retirement age after Macron raised the retirement age. Great, right? And that's their tradition, right? And Bernie Sanders probably wants the same thing. He wants to, Bernie Sanders want to raise the minimum wage and lower the retirement age. I am older than dirt and I will not be retiring, but I will let other people retire so kids who are more likely to vote for me will be working. I'm just kidding. But yeah, there you go. But yeah, no, I don't. I mean, look, they are, and that's Mélenchon has the respect of Galloway. He has taken anti-imperialist stances and gotten a lot of shit for it before. I'm not poo-pooing this. This is huge. I did not expect this. This is a big thing. This is a big deal. But there's a lot of danger. It's a lot of danger. We are marching into uncharted territory, as they say. Thank you, Gabby. Gabby's a beloved member of our community, doing a lot of outreach, but a lot of people in our community, John McCarthy and Ellie, and so many people work really hard because they believe in this vision. And, don't think that it doesn't make me understand that I have a great deal of responsibility. I do, right? And I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I understand that I have a responsibility to do my best. But we also have a responsibility to not half-ass this. I mean, this community, Center for Political Innovation, needs to grow. It needs to expand. It needs to have bigger numbers. It needs to grow. It needs to grow. It needs to happen. We need to become an outreach-centered group. We need to not rely on the internet, and we need to start bringing in random people who would never go looking for this and figuring out how to win them to our ideas. And we need to do that. And it is high time that we do that. So there you go. Yeah. For that old time Bolshevik agitating. Thank you, Junior. It was good to see you at our CPI Zoom call this weekend. It was good to see you. And yeah. I mean, that's the politics that I was one to. Go and read Why Communism by Moishe Olgin. Go and read, Toward Soviet America by William Z. Foster. Go and read the speeches of Eugene Debs. We compiled a lot of old-time Bolshevik agitating in our textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses, the new CPI textbook. We compiled, I've got Elizabeth Gurley Flynn speeches in here. I've got Eugene Debs speeches in here. I got a Foster speech in there. I mean, I've got, the speech to the court by the Black Revolutionary Bill Epton. I compiled in this book a lot of original material from class conscious revolutionaries. We need good old fashioned class struggle, anti-imperialist working class rhetoric. And that is what we need. That is what we need. And we need it. Why do communists hate Khrushchev? Besides the secret speech, he was a great leader. No, he was not, right? He was very erratic. He cut off China, right? He created a rift in the anti-imperialist camp. He divided the Soviet Union from China, and that had catastrophic consequences. When he cut off aid from China, devastated China economically, that was disastrous. He sent nuclear weapons to Cuba, and then he basically tried to almost surrender to the U.S. imperialists. It was like his foreign policy was totally messed up and confused, right? And his own party removed him, right? He was eventually arrested by the other leaders of the Soviet Union. He was doing such a bad job messing things up. And 1964, he was out. Kosygin and Brezhnev came in and removed him. He was so bad. And then in the 70s, the Soviet Union pivoted in a more anti-imperialist direction. But, his political line was basically that he would make a deal with the United States that as the leader, the Soviet Union as the leader of communism, would get all the colonized countries to stop being revolutionary in exchange for nuclear detente. And that was a disastrous policy. China wasn't going to accept that. People around the world were not going to accept that. I didn't know this. He let the Banderites out of prison. Yeah, well, there you go, right? And he gave Crimea to Ukraine. What a mistake that was. Look at I guess he didn't know the Soviet Union was going to dissolve, but, Khrushchev was awful in many, many ways. The secret speech in and of itself was a devastating psychological blow. But even if he hadn't done that, his leadership of the USSR, even the other, figures in the Soviet bureaucracy, who may even have agreed with some of his sentiments against Stalin and all that, they all removed him at one point. Khrushchev was completely incompetent, and he was leading the Soviet Union in a very, very bad direction. His theory, right? The three peacefuls, that's the doctrine of Khrushchev. Peaceful coexistence between imperialism and socialism. Well, right there, that's never going to be the case. The imperialists are always going to try to destroy every socialist country. So there can't be peaceful coexistence. We would want that. Obviously, that's a great thing to strive for. But the Soviet Union and China and all that could just be left alone by the imperialists. That'd be great. But it's not going to happen, right? They're going to try to subvert it, try to overthrow it. So even saying that that's a possibility is like presenting an illusion. That's the first thing. Peaceful competition. Right? That is the worst one, in my opinion, because the Soviet Union, compared to the Western capitalist countries, they had nothing, right? They built themselves up from nothing. They built the power plants, they electrified, but they were still starting at a much lower level. The Western countries had been colonizing the whole world for 200 years. They had huge amounts of wealth and industrialization. And so the idea that the Soviet Union, that had just raised itself up, that had just industrialized in the 1930s, then had a huge devastating war that killed 27 million people and destroyed the country, then reindustrialized again, that they were going to be able to outproduce the Western imperialists, that was an illusion. And thinking that that was the answer, just because socialism is better than capitalism, well, it is, but it's not that much better. It's not able to completely outstrip imperialism after just getting over the hurdle of industrialization. The idea that because socialism is more efficient than capitalism, the Soviet Union will win just by making better material goods, that was peaceful competition. That was the idea that the Soviet Union was just going to, with their socialist system, they were going to make more tractors and refrigerators and light bulbs than America would, and everyone would just see that their system was more efficient. That was total illusion. The Soviet Union was not at the level of the Western capitalist countries. They rose up from nothing. They had huge achievements, but they were still, the Western countries had been colonizing the entire world for 200 years. And the Soviet Union had to fight to survive from the moment it came into existence. That 15 countries invaded, the Russian Civil War, World War II. They didn't have any chance, right? So for them, the idea that, we're blockaded, we're cut off from the Western world, but just because socialism is a more efficient system than capitalism, we're just going to be able to outproduce. We're just going to be able to outproduce that. That was an illusion, right? And then peaceful transition. Now, this is where it gets tricky. I believe in a peaceful transition to socialism. But I recognize that it may not be possible. I want it to be possible, and I advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. And it's very important. And that China even said this when they criticized it. Go read Long Live Leninism. They made clear peaceful transition is preferable, and that where it is possible, it should always be embraced. So we're not against a peaceful transition to socialism, but saying that it is the only possibility is setting up for disaster, because we know that the capitalists and the imperialists can be very violent in enforcing their will. They can abolish democracy. They can set up a fascist state. And that preparing workers for the fact that they may someday have to defend democracy by doing what Abraham Lincoln did and crushing an armed revolt of the rich and powerful, trying to preserve their system and trying to preserve their power against the democratic will of the people. That to some degree is necessary, letting people know that they may at some point have to fight for their rights and have to defend democracy against fascism, right? And that if you just frame it as, well, no, there's a peaceful transition, if you just leave it at that, you're not doing your job, right? You do need to be acknowledging that a peaceful transition is preferable, and it's what we want. It's what we advocate. We do not advocate violence, but there is an element of violence from the imperialists, and that when people's democratic rights are crushed, when people live under colonialism and oppression, they have the right to fight back. The Palestinians, they have to fight. They have to fight back, right? And telling the Palestinians, oh, you can't fight back because we're for a peaceful transition, that wasn't correct. But there's nuance to that position too. You got to be very careful with all these things. We do not advocate violence. We want a peaceful transition to socialism. All right. Is the beef between China and India a problem for BRICS? Look, there's going to be problems. There's a border dispute, a long-standing border dispute between India and China that's gone on for years. And the Soviet Union at one point backed India against China in that border dispute. These are two countries that border each other that have disputed territories. Is it a problem for BRICS? I'm sure it comes up. But one of the issues in BRICS is if you're in BRICS, you can't put sanctions on any other country in BRICS. So there you go. All right. In this morning's presentation, someone alleged China dominating countries through debt, but China forgive 70 countries debt years ago. What presentation this morning? What are you talking about? What's this morning's presentation? Who are you talking about? Like, was there some event, or are you talking about your college or your church? I guess it's a Sunday. I don't know what you're talking about. But yes, China is forgiving debt. The way the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank works is that they loan you the money to build it, and then you reinvest the money in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So, all of the allegations about the Belt and Road and all of that are so full of projection. So full of projection. Is it possible that China makes mistakes? Is it possible that the way China interacts with developing countries is, there you go. All right. Will Starmer be toppled by his own Labor MPs? I don't know the internal dynamics of the Labor Party at this time. I know that he's not a Corbyn. He's not an anti-imperialist. Keir Starmer is just a regular run-of-the-mill pro-imperialist, whatever. That's what he is. Because of that, will there be some internal squabbling in the Labor Party that might lead to his overthrow? It's possible, but it's not going to be like there's not going to be some anti-imperialist upsurge among the Labor Party. The Labor Party is a dead end. And they've purged the Corbyn faction that had anti-imperialist sentiments. They purged them. So, if he does get removed, which happens, right? Leaders of, the party can still have a majority, but they can have a no confidence vote and oust their prime minister or whatever. But it wouldn't be, there you go. Wokeism is anti-worker and is divisive. Well, it is. And you have to talk about what woke means, right? We have this booklet we printed. I'm about to put it in order for 1,000 of them to be printed, and we're going to distribute them at the conventions and all of that. that that wokeism, you have to be careful how you define it, right? Because there's some people that if you start criticizing wokeism, they're like, oh, you're saying that opposing racism is bad. No, long before woke, communists opposed racism. And then you get people that are like, well, woke actually means, it's like, yeah, in the 70s and 80s, woke meant something very, very different. It referred to, like having a black anti-colonial perspective, right? And obviously it doesn't mean that anymore. Wokeism now refers to a political movement that is promoted by mainstream media. And it refers to a pro-imperialist current that is obsessed with destruction and cancel culture and virtue signaling and all kinds of stuff. And that movement, which tends to be in favor of degrowth, which tends to be about tearing families apart and all kinds of things, that movement is very negative, and it plays a negative role. And I go into great detail, right? In this booklet, we have a section, let's talk about woke, right? Let's talk about woke. Right. So, wokeism, I would argue, what it is generally understood to mean by our society. If you want to get nitpicky about the definition, that's on you. What it generally is referred to is everything that you said, Chris. It is anti-working class. It views working class people as inferior, uneducated. It scoffs at the notion of family, and it especially doesn't want life to get better because the planet is heating up and we should all be poorer, and you got to shit in a bucket in your front yard, and you got to live in a pod and eat bugs and own nothing and be happy about it. And that's anti-working class, the communist groups were unable to resist being wokeified, and that was the end of them, right? CPI, Center for Political Innovation, is a non-woke group. No one will ever be kicked out of CPI because of their religious beliefs, because if their religion says no to gay marriage, that's their business. If their religion says no to abortion, that's their business. However, no one will ever be bullied in CPI. And this is important too, because, we gave birth to a wing of politics that then went in a totally different direction. Right. And that, CPI, we've always said we are neutral on social issues, right? We are neither pro-LGBT nor anti-LGBT. We are neither pro-abortion nor anti-abortion. We are in favor of class politics, a government of action to fight for working families, and we are anti-war, and we want to connect the United States with the rising new economy in the world. And that's it, as my anti-woke perspective flourished, some new social media personalities came along, and they took this in the opposite direction. And if you listen to them, they rarely ever talk about economics and class struggle. All they talk about is using slurs for certain groups and bullying, and look how much I work out, and so-and-so's a faggot, and so-and-so's a queer, and that we don't want anything to do with that. We'll never bully anyone for who they are or for their religious beliefs, but we're not focused on a culture war. We're trying to build a working class anti-imperialist movement, right? And there's a nuance to this. There's a certain nuance to this, and that there are certain sinister actors that are not building a real organization. They're building fandoms. And of course, they see me as a competitor because I was doing this first. And, look, I wouldn't be able to do what I do on here if I hadn't learned a lot from the communist groups I was in, from all the studies, the study that I've done, all the experience I have. I've studied extensively the history of the communist movement. I also studied LaRoucheism and the Schiller Institute and their history and stuff. And I don't pretend I invented all of this, right? And so for these people to draw from my ideas is a form of flattery. And I'm not going to sue them for copyright infringement or something like that. I'm glad that they drew from what I did. I appreciate that. Shows that I got something right. Somebody wanted to copy it. But they're building internet fandoms. I'm building a real organization, right? And they have decided that in order to win the internet, they need to mobilize their fans against me. and they need to harass me. They need to smear me. They need to, try and destroy my life and destroy my organization and try and do everything they can to damage me and anyone I work with. And I have an issue with that. I have a little bit of an issue with that. Not thrilled about that, but again, this is the training wheels coming off. For too long, we relied on people just drifting in from the internet, and those days are over. We can't do that no more. We can't rely on people just drifting in from the internet anymore, right? We need to actually build a real organization. And so this is an opportunity, really, right? For way too long, we relied on people just drifting in from the internet, and that was a mistake on our part. We need to go and recruit ordinary people. We need to build an in real life movement, out of the movement to the masses. And we're going to do it. And, again, I said this on previous streams. I just want to say it again. I can't say it enough. There are certain people, not just the people I was just referring to, but some others, who watch everything that we do and they try to copy it. And they always try to copy it in a way that doesn't include us, which is silly. Like, why? You know what I mean? But it's like, oh, well, there must be some way that CPI is growing. There must be some way that CPI keeps all these people loyal to it. What can we do to do what CPI does, but not include CPI? That's silly. And what they don't understand is that what makes CPI work is the spiritual power of CPI, is the community that we are building, is the glow that people get from it, and all of this. And that there's no cheat code. And I keep mentioning this. There's no cheat code, right? There's no like secret code that they're going to learn on their, it doesn't work that way, right? And that if you want to see the power of what we do, be part of it. We've never excluded you. We've always said that you're welcome, right? And we're not competing. You can't compete, right? CPI is not a party. You can be a member of any political party and be in CPI. On top of that, we don't tell people who they can watch on social media. We don't do that, right? It's your life, right? We have a job to do. We have a job to do that needs to get done. That's why CPI exists. If you want to help us get the job done, welcome aboard. Don't want to help us? That's on you. We have a job to do, and we're not looking to compete with anybody, right? And so that's it, right? And if you want to see what we do, come do it with us, and you'll figure it out. But you won't figure it out by watching us and then running back to your group and trying to copy it. That ain't gonna work. Not gonna work, right? Because you're just not getting the essence of what we're doing. And as long as you're viewing things in this competitive fandom way, you'll never be able to copy what we do. So, I'm just laying it all out there. I'm just speaking frankly to the people. I hope they're watching right now. If you want what CPI has, be part of CPI. I mean, it's that simple, right? If you want what we have, be part of it. And we have never blocked anyone from having a piece of what we do. And, we have never, I'm begging other people to write. I'm begging other people to speak. I'm not hogging the spotlight for myself and putting down other people. I don't do that. And I was in a group where I experienced that. I will never do that to anybody. People in CPI know that I am constantly begging other people to speak, constantly begging other people to write. I am not putting other people, blocking other people and all of that. I want more people to be writing books for CPI, speaking. I'm constantly begging other people to do more stuff. So there we go. Yeah. Anyhow. Okay. Francois Mitterrand, details, neoliberal leftist. He was French imperialist politician, social democrat. He was much more at odds with the U.S. imperialists than France, current government is under Macron. But he was he was an important French socialist, social democrat. He's kind of like the Labour Party, but in France. And because it was France that is kind of more at odds with the British and the American imperialists, he was a little bit more cutting edge and much bigger welfare state, etc. But yeah, he was just a French social democrat. I don't know. I don't know what you want me to say about him. He governed France at a time when, the Soviet Union still existed and that communism was a big movement. And yeah, he was a French social democratic leader. I don't know what more to say. All right. Paris Commune was a radical 19th century movement. What are the takeaways from France of 2024? Well, I just talked about France in 2024 for quite some time. I would say that, you know, I mean, the main thing of what I said was that if socialism in France wants to take off, it has to de-wokeify and it has to capture the populist energy that so far only the right has captured, and the right is losing because of their bad take on Palestine. And that's the only hope for French socialism. And if you want to talk about the Paris Commune of 1871, you know, people should go back and read that. There's this notion that if you wave an American flag, you're racist. You're a bad person because the American flag is the symbol of empire, blah, blah, blah. Well, 1871, Paris Commune, that they were waving the tricolor, the French flag. The Paris Commune of 1871 was a patriotic movement. And communists recognized it was the first working class government, but it was all about patriotism, right? I mean, they even you know, they rewrote the lyrics to the French national anthem to be their own anthem, and it was basically the capitalist bosses surrendered to the Prussian invaders, and so the working class continued to fight to defend the homeland. It was a very patriotic and nationalist movement for socialism. So if nationalism and socialism, you know, if combining those is some unforgivable sin, as many people say, you know, you got to condemn the Paris Commune. So there you go. All right. You will know that CPI is having an impact on society when the security state starts infiltrating. Well, that's already happened. That's already happened. I'm not going into detail, and we don't care. We're not doing anything illegal, right? We assume we're being monitored by the government at all times. We're not engaged in any clandestine illegal activities. We're educating people. We're putting on classes. We're not even really leading protests. We might, you know, have a rally here or there where we stand around with signs about some important anti-imperialist issue. We've done a lot to raise awareness about Uhuru, but we're not engaging in militant protests or rallies. We're just an educational group. So if the government sends people into our group to see what we're doing, they're going to be bored and disappointed. And we honestly don't mind that much. And it's not that hard to do. They can just walk in. I mean, that's whatever. That said, you know, we are on guard against provocateurism. Anybody who comes around and starts talking about terrorism or illegal activities, you're out of there. And before all of our events, people have to sign something making clear that they understand that there will be no discussion of illegal activities of any kind, no discussion of terrorism, no discussion of violent revolution, right? That's very clear. So no provocateur shit can go on. That's very clear. And we've made that abundantly clear in all of our material. We advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. We do not discuss anything illegal. So, you know, it's already happened, right? And I'm not going to go into detail about that, but it's already happened, right? And you know, it'll happen again, I'm sure. But we've survived and we keep going, right? And look, I mean, again, right? If you are living in Satan's world and you're not being persecuted, you are not living a righteous life. Let me emphasize that once again. If you are living in Satan's world and you are not being persecuted, you are not living a righteous life. That's it. So we expect persecution. We expect to be smeared. We expect the internet to be rigged against us. And all of that is a compliment. All of that means we're right over the target. It means we're doing the right thing. But I got to tell you, and this is the weird thing about it, if you listen to what the Trump people are saying, you listen to Carrie Lake and all of that, everyone's tired of being canceled is becoming part of the American experience. Kids have been canceled by their classmates. People have lost family members. Everyone is tired of this toxic left cancel culture. Everybody's tired of it. And the fact that leftists and socialists have hung their hat on this and attached themselves to it, they're fucked, right? Everyone's getting canceled now. I mean, I was just talking to some, I mean, it's like kids get canceled in school, right? Everyone's afraid to do interviews when I go to protests because they're afraid somebody will see them on YouTube and they'll lose their job. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts, right? Part of the right-wing blowback, and let's just be real about this, that they're trying to say that wokeism comes from China, which it does not. China is not woke, right? China is not woke in any conceivable way. They're trying to say that wokeism comes from China. Wokeism is all a big conspiracy from China. And wokeism is a conspiracy by the American deep state. It's not a conspiracy from China. Okay? And that when leftists go along with wokeism, they're only helping feed the right-wing blowback. So there you go. All righty. It's not a question of for the imperialists to use WMDs against a workers' movement, judging the history of their violence against workers. I mean, and the problem with WMDs is that it tends to take out a whole area. At Occupy Wall Street, right? I was at Occupy Wall Street. They never used tear gas against Occupy Wall Street. Did you know that? They used all kinds of other things against Occupy Wall Street. There was even talk of a sound cannon. They didn't use it, but they rolled around their sound cannon to show everyone they had it. But they beat people up. They maced people in the face and all that. But tear gas, like just tear gas, they never used it against Occupy Wall Street. You know why? Because there's a bunch of rich people who have apartments down there. Right? And there are a bunch of rich people who have apartments near Wall Street. And they would all, get tear gas in their eyes in their home apartment. It would ruin their afternoon. Right? Weapons of mass destruction tend to destroy an entire area. Right? You're talking about WMDs, you're talking about nuclear weapons, you're talking about chemical weapons and all of that. Like, these are things that are used in wars. They tend to be used when one side is losing epically and they just want to have a big game changer. It's illegal under international law to use them. That obviously doesn't stop people. People still will use them, but yeah, it's weapons of mass destruction are generally something that's used in a military confrontation. And it's something that is used by a side that is losing epically. And so then they, in order to have a big game changer, they do that. And that's why people talk about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not necessary. Japan got the exact same deal they were offered before the bombing. It was just to show the Soviet Union they had them. Japan had already lost at that point. All those deaths didn't need to happen at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the majority of those who died were Korean, I believe. So there you go. There you go. All right. I've noticed about the PSYOP accounts is that they have no goals. Instead, they just have huge followings. Yeah, part of it I've noticed with social media, and I think this is not a conspiracy. I think it's just how social media works, is that the dumber and more outrageous you are, the more attention you get, from people agreeing with you or disagreeing with you, right? Like this stream tonight, I actually gave a sophisticated, nuanced argument laying out my view of the French election results, right? But that's not the way to get views, right? If I wanted to get views on social media, what I would do is I would either think that this is the end of the world and I would hate communists, or I would think that this is like heaven on earth is the most amazing thing. And I would be so outrageous. Oh my God, Melanchon won. I'm so happy. Or, oh my God, Melanchon won. This is the end of the world. And people who either felt it was the end of the world or felt it was heaven on earth would share it. And that's how you get views. And that doesn't teach anybody anything. Right? Social media kind of reinforces telling people what they already think, giving voice to sentiments that people already have, doing so in the most theatrical and over-the-top performative way. That's social media. And it sucks. Social media sucks. And look, I'm done lowering I'm done with that, right? And I think the fact that I'm not saying, now hit the like button, now hit the subscribe button, now hit the notifications bell. I'm not doing that no more. I don't say that no more because I don't want to win the internet, right? I'm not on here for you all to like me. I'm on here for people who are serious and are part of my movement and part of this organization to go out and build. That's what I'm for. And, I'm not going to win the internet, and I want to build the in real life movement that we need. And that's that. That's the end of that. Right. And that's what I want. And I feel this is an important turning point in my social media work. Is that I, at this point, don't care. I'm focused on building the in real life movement. I'm focused on being there for the people who love me in my community, just like I love them, and being there for them and mentoring them and helping them do the work that needs to be done and getting to the masses. That's what I'm here to do. And I don't care about the other stuff. I'm trying to change my perspective on everything. And I will say, I get invited. I was invited someplace, but I couldn't go because of work. And I'm almost a little bit burned out on the travel too. I've been many places. I met the French president. I interviewed the last president of Iran. I've been to Iran a bunch of times, love Iran, been to Russia a bunch of times, love Russia. I've been to a lot of communist gatherings, communist conferences. And I think I wish more people in our organization got the opportunity to do that. I think it's very important for them to see, but I'm kind of burned out on that stuff. I want to build a movement here in the United States. That's what I want to do. That is what I have been called to do. That is what my purpose is. And that is what I want to do. And I'm just, I want to build an organization. I want to build a community of people who live for these ideals. That's what I want to do. And I'm kind of burned out on everything else. Right. It's weird because I'm tired, which is, good because I'm generally antsy and wanting to do more. I'm tired, which is good, but I haven't given up, and I continue to have great ideas and visions of what I can build, but I don't do so with any urgency. I do so with patience, but we must build. So there we go. There we go. Is philanthropy still relevant? Well, you all heard me make the joke, right? Two hillbillies are talking. I heard that Joe's daughter is a thespian. That's right. She's a thespian. There's a friend of mine who made this joke. Didn't make it up. I'm sure he does it on his social media. So please don't pretend this is my joke. I heard that Joe's daughter is a thespian. That's right. She's up in New York matriculating. Damn right. I even heard she engages in philanthropy. And it sounds so dirty, doesn't it? Philanthropy is charity, right? Look, and social services are a good thing. Many people have pointed out that philanthropy is kind of self-serving. I'm on social media, Caleb. No kidding. That philanthropy, these it creates jobs for people, right? These foundations, they have their expenses. A certain percentage of the money you give doesn't go to the people that are getting helped. It goes to the people running the office and the people who do the advertising strategy. And that, philanthropy can be an entity unto itself. But look, I'm not opposed to feeding homeless people. I'm not opposed to helping people that are in need. And there is this Malthusian, they talk about the cruelty of charity and all that. That's really demented. Right. That's a big part of libertarian thought. But is that the answer? Right. Do we just, no. But honestly, stuff like what the Black Panthers did with their free breakfast program, that's what real anti-imperialist groups with a real base in communities, that's what they actually do. And, I do want to show this. I made this graphic the other day. Right. And I want you all to see it. Right. And I was going to show it on the streams eventually. This is worth a whole stream. So I can't go into huge detail about this because, this is a whole stream right here. But I just want to put this graphic on the screen and just introduce it to you because this is what we need to understand. And I guess if there's no more super chats after this, I will put it on the screen. I will leave. But if there's more super chats, I'll answer them. But, it's getting late. It's after midnight. I got work in the morning. But let me share a screen. Right. Right. There's 3 stages of revolutionary work. Strategic defensive is when the revolutionary organization struggles to exist and maintain a network of support in a hostile atmosphere. And that's what we're in right now. And that's what communism in America has been in since the end of the Second World War, since McCarthyism. That's the strategic defensive. Now, there's also strategic equilibrium, where conditions among the masses and divisions among the ruling class have intensified to the point that the revolutionary organization can exist and flourish as part of the political ecosystem. And that, I believe, is coming sooner than you think. And that is what Center for Political Innovation is preparing for. The time when the ruling class is so divided and conditions among the people have deteriorated enough that people are way more attracted to our ideas, number one, and we are allowed to exist because there's factions in the ruling class that are fighting with each other and they need us to exist, etc. Right? We're not there yet, but we're getting there. Right? And we need to be prepared for strategic equilibrium. And then the final stage is called strategic offensive. And that's when the revolutionary organization moves toward taking power, positioning itself at the center of a united front. Now, obviously, we're not there. That comes after strategic equilibrium, and it comes after you've built up a very significant base among the population, and that's a whole nother thing. But the way you operate in these three different phases is very different, right? And in strategic defensive is very difficult. And that's what communist groups have been in for the last 50, 60, 70 years. They've been just trying to survive in a hostile atmosphere. But conditions are getting to the point that strategic equilibrium could soon be possible. And CPI exists with the understanding that there will come a time, right, in the near future where we will hit strategic equilibrium, where we will be allowed to exist. It'll become possible for us to really exist and flourish in society because of the conditions among the masses and because of the divisions of the ruling class. And that right now, CPI is getting itself in order so that when strategic equilibrium hits, we can function in a new way. Because the way we function right now is this educational network. You know, we're just kind of teaching people stuff and all of that. But strategic equilibrium, that'll be a different time. In strategic equilibrium, we can start feeding people. We can have a free breakfast program. In strategic equilibrium, we will function very differently because we will be part of the political ecosystem, because sections of the ruling class will deem us necessary, because the conditions among the masses will make people much more receptive to our ideas and the need for us to exist. It'll be a different thing. The way an organization operates now under strategic defensive is you just hold it together. I mean, you're teaching people the ideas, you're holding a network of people together who can work together, like, you know, but we need to operate with strategic equilibrium in mind. Now, strategic offensive, we're not there yet. That's so far beyond anything we can imagine. But these are the three stages in a revolutionary development, right? And we need to keep this in mind. And that I keep telling people strategic equilibrium. I ended the last CPI meeting that we had. I said, onward to strategic equilibrium. I need to keep this in mind. I think there's a very good chance that in 3 to 5 years, we could be in strategic equilibrium. Are we ready for that? Are we ready? Do we have a network of people who can work together to get it done under such circumstances? I mean, would we be able to carry out strategic equilibrium? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But right now we're in strategic defensive, right? And communism in America has been in strategic defensive for many decades. But there you go. I just wanted to share that concept with you all. All right. Okay. So I don't see any more super chats, so I will put on the closing music. Thanks, everybody. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.